Welcome back to The Explainer. Let's get right into it because today we're unpacking a truly fascinating turning point in modern geopolitics. We're going to decode how a highly compressed, literally 48-hour window in mid-June of 2026 completely transformed the structural reality of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We aren't just talking about a shift on the battlefield here. We are looking at a massive, profound geopolitical, economic, and military phase shift.
So let's drop right into the visceral drama of June 18, 2026. If Ukraine burns, your Moscow will burn. That was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in a voice message sent directly to international journalists right after a massive drone operation against the Russian capital. Now, this wasn't just rhetoric, right? It brilliantly illustrates Kyiv's formal doctrine of asymmetric psychological deterrence. It was a blunt, unavoidable message that the insulation previously enjoyed by Muscovites was permanently ruptured. To really grasp the macro-level shockwaves, we first need to look at the micro-level tactical events that kick-started this whole chain reaction.
Section 1. Striking the capital. The Moscow Offensive.
The sheer scale of this operation is honestly staggering. Picture a multi-axis penetration from all sides. On the morning of June 18, a swarm of 194 intercepted drones out of 555 launched nationwide descended on Moscow. This was a highly coordinated penetration designed to completely overwhelm the city's incredibly dense electronic warfare and kinetic anti-air networks. The primary target? The Kapotnya oil refinery. That facility sits just 9 to 15 miles from the Kremlin. That is practically next door.
You might be wondering, how did they bypass those sophisticated defenses? Well, the answer lies in a quantum leap in indigenous Ukrainian aerospace engineering. They deployed these newly developed BARS hybrid drone cruise missiles. With jet-powered speed and an operational range pushed well over 350 to 500 miles, these systems drastically reduced the reaction window for Russian air defenses. This is a definitive shift, moving from purely attritional, grinding combat to highly lethal, precision-guided deep interdiction.
And the impact on the ground? It was chaotic. Systemic paralysis. Over 500 commercial flights were canceled as 4 major aviation hubs were completely shut down. The Interior Ministry actually had to halt traffic on the city's critical ring road. We saw falling drone debris and spent interceptors injure 17 civilians. And perhaps most hauntingly, residents in the eastern suburb of Balashika documented this toxic black rain, a dark, oily residue literally coating their streets. The psychological barrier that framed the conflict as a distant, controlled operation completely shattered.
Naturally, the reaction from the Russian state was immediate and fierce. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov declared that words alone are not enough, threatening to commence massive group strikes on a regular basis against Ukrainian infrastructure. Simultaneously, ultranationalist military bloggers were radicalized by the perceived failure of their air defenses, demanding unrestricted escalation. But Lavrov's threat actually exposes a really interesting strategic paradox. The Russian military had already been conducting maximum capacity strikes for years, so threatening more strikes suggests either a looming depletion of precision stockpiles or a tacit admission that their previous campaigns had failed to degrade Ukrainian manufacturing.
Section 2. Cracking the war economy. Macro interdiction.
Let's zoom out from the physical destruction and look at the severe macroeconomic headwinds. The absolute crucial data point to understand here is 50 liters. That's roughly 13.2 gallons. By mid-June, at least 18 Russian regions were forced to implement this strict civilian purchasing cap on gasoline. By surgically targeting facilities like the Kapotnya refinery, Ukraine bottlenecked Russia's ability to refine its crude oil into usable end products. So, we're looking at this incredible paradox, a crude oil giant suddenly suffering from acute domestic gasoline deficits.
Faced with that degrading domestic refining capacity, the Kremlin pivoted hard to maximize exports of raw, unrefined crude oil. But this created a massive logistical bottleneck. By mid-June 2026, over 120 million barrels of crude oil were trapped in floating maritime storage on vessels adrift at sea. That is a staggering 25% increase from just 2 months prior. The so-called shadow fleet simply couldn't offload the volume fast enough.
And then the financial time bomb detonated. On June 17, a crucial United States sanctions waiver officially expired. Previously, this waiver had permitted international financial transactions for Russian oil that was already loaded onto vessels. Its expiration trapped those 120 million barrels in legal limbo, effectively choking off the Kremlin's ability to finalize sales and repatriate the foreign currency that is absolutely vital for sustaining its war economy. Okay, now let's pan the narrative camera away from the smoky skies of Moscow and the trapped oil tankers and look at the pristine diplomatic rooms of France.
Section 3. The Strategic Bargain G7 Summit in Evian.
The G7 summit achieved a rare and vital alignment. Western leaders orchestrated massive, synchronized diplomatic victories. We're talking unified transatlantic security, escalated hydrocarbon sanctions, exploiting that expired waiver we just mentioned, drastically augmented air defenses ahead of winter, and revolutionary military production licensing. Let's look a little closer at two of these crucial mechanisms.
First, how did they achieve this sudden US-EU unity? Through some incredibly complex geopolitical horse trading known as the Hormuz deal. The United States signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran, lifting a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. In exchange for European assistance in demining and stabilizing that Middle Eastern choke point, the U.S. administration committed its full diplomatic and military weight back behind Europe's defense initiatives in Ukraine.
Second, they fundamentally changed how weapons are supplied. The old model, it relied on highly vulnerable cross-border logistical supply lines. The new model, codified right there at the summit, transfers Western intellectual property directly to Ukraine. This allows for the localized, domestic production of advanced long-range missiles and even Patriot interceptors right inside Ukraine. It's a massive structural shift, officially embedding Ukraine directly into the NATO military-industrial supply chain.
Section 4. Financing defense. Anti-ballistic.
Of course, grand diplomatic frameworks require real capital to actually work. Take a look at this monumental figure. A £750 million bilateral military aid package from the United Kingdom. It was designed to procure an astonishing 150,000 Ukrainian-manufactured drones and advanced air defense missiles. But what makes this package a total paradigm shift isn't just its size. It's the completely unprecedented funding mechanism behind it.
The entire UK package was financed through the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration, or ERA initiative. This legally complex mechanism leverages the accrued interest generated from immobilized Russian sovereign assets held in Western banks. So the alliance effectively set a major legal precedent, weaponizing Russia's own frozen national wealth to pay for the very drones and missiles dismantling its military infrastructure.
And it wasn't just the UK. The Prioritized Ukraine Requirements List, or PEARL, saw a historic mobilization of over $1 billion. 9 partner nations announced concurrent contributions, and it fully funded the Czech initiative to rapidly source long-range artillery shells from global markets. The global coalition had definitively moved past its previous hesitancy, rapidly filling critical capability gaps.
Section 5. Global Architecture. Interlocking Theaters.
Let's take one final macro zoom out to examine how this European conflict inextricably links to the geopolitical stability of the entire globe. Consider the escalating support from Australia. They contributed a massive new $100 million package to PEARL. But this raises a fascinating question. Why is a nation geographically furthest from the European theater investing so heavily, raising their total military assistance to over $1.6 billion? Well, the answer lies in the doctrine of indivisible security. Australian leaders explicitly stated that what happens in Ukraine deeply matters in the Indo-Pacific. It's the strategic belief that a successful Western deterrence of aggression in Eastern Europe sets a non-negotiable precedent for deterring similar state actor ambitions in places like the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait.
And that brings us to the Sino-Russian dynamic, which is an immense tension in Beijing's diplomatic balancing act. Publicly, China's foreign ministry calls for peace, stating, "Dialogue is the only viable way out." However, European intelligence, heavily cited in our sources, points to a covert reality. Subsidiaries of Russian state-owned arms companies actively developing and producing long-range attack drones inside China. This unresolved global dynamic severely complicates the entire diplomatic landscape.
So, let's tie it all together. What you should take away from this explainer is that mid-June 2026 was a structural phase shift. Ukraine proved its asymmetric deep strike capacity. The Russian macroeconomic engine was structurally choked by targeting fuel processing and shadow fleets. Defense procurement was thoroughly globalized and localized within Ukraine. And finally, the interlocking nature of global security theaters was completely confirmed.
All the pieces interlock perfectly. From the first drone launch over Moscow to the final summit signature in France, the strategic initiative fundamentally shifted. And it leaves us with this final provocative thought. With the war now being fought in global shipping lanes, international banks, and defense boardrooms, has the front line finally moved entirely beyond the physical battlefield? Thank you so much for watching. Focus learners, we will see you in the next explainer.